You ready, Nikki? Because I think we're ready.
Thank you, Councillor McMaster. Yes, we're ready to go.
Okay, I'm going to call this committee of the whole meeting on July the 5th, 2021 to order. Acknowledge that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation. Secondly, the notice to all attendees that the meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. I'm going to move from the chair that the July 5th, 2021 Committee of the Whole agenda be adopted. Do we have any objections? Seeing none, the agenda is adopted. We move from the chair that the minutes of the Committee of Whole meeting held May 31, 2021 be adopted. Any objections? Seeing none, minutes are adopted. Do you have any public comment, Nikki?
Thank you, Councillor McMaster. We do not have any comments right now. I will call once, I will call twice, and I will call thrice, and we are showing none.
Okay, I take it there's no correspondence.
You are correct.
Move on to presentations and reports. Item 6.1, invited presentation, West Coast Housing Needs and Demand Study report from McCullough Development Services. Are they doing a presentation?
Thank you, Councillor McMaster. I'm just going to turn on Sandy McKay's invited presentation speaking abilities.
Okay.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. I think you can all hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Great. So I don't know if I have the ability to share screens.
Hi, Sandy. This is Nikki. You should have that just turning on now.
Okay, there we go. I do now have the ability to share screen. Perfect. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Great. Oh, so it doesn't look like I have the ability to share the screen yet. That's all right. I believe that you should all have copies of my presentation in your agenda today. Oh, there it goes. Look at that. Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. Perfect. So as Nikki mentioned, my name is Sandy Mackey. I'm the Housing Research and Policy Lead here at McCullough Development Services. And along with our partners at our consulting firm and our project team, we've been invited by the District of Tofino, as well as partnering local governments to complete the West Coast Housing Need and Demand Study. So today is just a really brief introduction to the project for you folks. When your community members ask about it, you want to be able to give them an informed answer. And we'll also be talking a bit about some of the upcoming next steps, as well as how you can participate in the study moving forward. And I'll try not to take too much of your time tonight. I know it's a beautiful night here in Victoria, so hopefully it's just as nice there in Tofino. So we'll try to get through this as quickly as possible. I'll give you a brief introduction on who we are at McCullough. We'll talk about some of the deliverables and objectives for this project, and about how we're going to collect some of the data, how we're going to collect some of the engagement portions, and then the next steps. And before we get going, I will also acknowledge that without the funding support of the Union of BC Municipalities, this project would not be possible. They're providing the majority of the funding for this study. So McCullough Development Services, we're a planning and community development consulting firm. We've got about 20 staff, including planners, development managers, dedicated experts in Indigenous relations and communication. You might be more familiar with our sister society, McCullough Housing Society. They're one of the largest operators of Indigenous nonprofit housing across British Columbia. We kind of grew out of that, recognizing that Macola also needed help with the sort of development operations to build more units. And then my department, the community planning department, is looking more at the conditions that make it easy for us to build affordable housing in communities. So what type of policy needs to be in place, what type of research, things like that. So we talk about it, that we kind of run the spectrum from concept all the way to community, and working with local governments, nonprofits, and other partners throughout. The goals and objectives for this study, first and foremost, housing needs reports are a relatively new requirement under the Local Government Act. As of spring 2019, all local governments are required to conduct a housing needs report every 5 years moving forward. The first one needs to be completed by, I think, summer of 2022. So you're going to be ahead of that first deadline. The requirements of the provincial legislation are quite specific. So that's first and foremost the main goal for this project, is to meet all of those provincial requirements, check all of the boxes that they need from us. What that usually looks like is a housing needs report, qualitative and quantitative data. We feel that, especially in smaller communities, it's important to give you both pieces as they inform and provide detail to one another. We'll also be making some high-level policy recommendations for future policy updates, as well as for future joint regional housing initiatives. This is a regional project with Ucluelet and a number of the neighboring nations, as well as the ACRD. So thinking about housing from a regional lens and how you can continue to work regionally to address housing needs. Finally, the last couple of things, building staff capacity is a really important part of this. Every 5 years doesn't seem like that often, but when in 5 years from now you're doing this again, it would be great if, instead of having to hire a consultant, you can leverage some of the capacity of your staff members to either make the process cheaper or make the process faster, potentially even doing it all in-house. We don't know what the funding program is going to look like in 5 years, so it's our goal to set you up as best as possible, regardless of how much funding is available. So as part of that, we'll be doing a staff capacity building session where we actually go over what the different requirements are, how to construct a report, and actually give you a data tool that will hopefully help your staff prepare a lot of the different charts and comparative elements that you need to show a lot of the data off in your reports. And then finally, through presentations like this, we'll be sharing all of our results with community leadership, with councils, with the board of the ACRD, and of course with the public through public forums. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we can actually come to the West Coast region and present a lot of that information in person. So what you can expect from this report. In the report are a couple of different things. It's what is happening in your community. So that's information on local and regional demography, households, incomes, economy, and housing affordability. It's also who it's happening to. So that's information that we get from our engagement data, as well as an affordability analysis, which actually can tell us which income groups and population groups are struggling the most to meet their housing needs. And finally, those high-level policy recommendations. What's not in the report is some of those next steps that you will need to take as a community. So it's where that new housing should go, the form or density it should take. Those are the types of decisions that get made through documents like your OCP, your zoning bylaws, and any partnership development or community education that you're undertaking as a result of this study. We'll be providing you with some of the most common tools that are available to local governments, as well as some recommendations based on the findings of the report. But kind of how you act on those recommendations is the next step. As we move forward with the project, there's a few interim deliverables you can expect and your staff can expect, as well as a few final deliverables. In the interim, the next couple of pieces are going to be a preliminary findings report, as well as an engagement summary report, which combined together kind of turn into our draft needs report and draft community profiles. I've left those in red because those are where we actually need some substantial staff time to help us review those draft reports. We want to make sure these reports work well for you and for your communities, and often in a regional context, it can be tough to get it right for each community. So we like to get a draft out to your staff, give them plenty of time to review it, and then we can go through and make as many corrections as we need to, or change the language in certain places, or flesh out certain areas. The final deliverables, obviously receiving the final needs report, you'll be receiving a final community profile, which is a 4-page, highly visual summary of all of the information collected in the report, or at least the most important information collected in the report. It's often the communications tool that will be used by your staff. the report itself can be quite dense. It's a lot of, charts and graphs and, information that's really useful to me as a planner and to your staff as people helping to inform decisions about the community, but it might be a little, opaque for folks who are just trying to get an idea of what is going on with housing in their community. And that's what that 4-page summary is for. It's really easy to understand, and it contains all of the most important information. You'll be receiving an indicators and monitoring guide, which is a short guide looking at some of the key indicators that we've collected and how to continue to monitor those indicators over the next 5 years. A lot of them are actual interim metrics that you can use as the census is released in about 2023. And then on an ongoing basis, there's some of those that are actually yearly indicators, which are really interesting. You get a housing planning tools guide. That's the piece that I talked about where we'll outline some of the key tools available to local governments. And finally, a data tool, which is basically an Excel sheet with a bunch of built-in sort of macros and kind of computer programming elements that allow your staff to hopefully create a lot of the details that they will need for the next housing needs report in 5 years. So briefly on the data collection piece, our objectives are pretty simple: communicating the context of each community, representing housing needs data, things like income, distributions, affordability, sales data, bedroom sizes, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of that you probably will have seen in the past. We'll also be projecting your total population, different age cohorts, and looking at affordable housing supply, as well as other characteristics. And then a big piece is cross-referencing all of that data with lived experience evidence. There are lots of places where the data doesn't get us what we need. So borrowing from lived experience and cross-referencing those pieces is really important. And finally, you'll be receiving quite a lot of information on something called core housing need, which I imagine most of you are familiar with, but basically it's the best sort of one metric number that we have to quantify housing need in a community. It's kind of an amalgam figure of a number of different indicators, but it's actually one of the biggest things that the provincial requirements ask us to report on. So one thing I always like to start off with, especially in smaller communities, is the data that we have for this study is not perfect. Small communities really struggle with the census, and regional electoral areas and Indigenous communities struggle even more. So you'll be noticing a lot of kind of limitations in your report. A couple of big things to watch out for: data suppression and random rounding. So Census Canada never has the exact number of people who are in this condition in your community. They always round up or down to the nearest 5 randomly, and that's to protect individual privacy and things like that. As well, data suppression: if you don't have enough population for them to make a statistical statement about a certain issue, they will just leave it off or indicate a 0 on Statistics Canada. So there might be a couple situations where you look at the data and you go, like, I know there were people in this circumstance in my community, but it says 0, and that will try to indicate as much as possible where that's occurred, but that might be one thing to watch out for. As well, the 2011 National Household Survey really makes this even more difficult. Lots of non-response rates on that survey when the long form census basically was optional. This year and the last one, they were back to normal. Long form census was not optional, which has really helped data in smaller communities. But in general, the census methodology does struggle to quantify communities like Tofino with seasonal populations, with lots of people who are temporary workers, things like that. Those people are often filling out the census in their home jurisdictions or their more permanent jurisdictions. And then finally, rental market data. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation collects primary rental market data for larger jurisdictions, but it does not collect any private rental data for a community the size of Tofino, which is unfortunate, but there are ways around it. So we'll be looking at things like the secondary market analysis and obviously working with your housing authority to get more accurate numbers. But the big thing you're going to notice, and this is the real flaw with trying to do this study now, is that the last data point for almost all of our required data sets, or at least the ones that are required through the census, is 2016, when the last census was done. And it's now 2021 and we're doing the next census. So I understand that is frustrating, but we won't start seeing data from this census period until at least 2023, maybe even halfway through 2023 for the full sets. So we're at this point, we're setting up a baseline, and at your next one, you'll be able to incorporate that data, and hopefully it's a little more accurate and a little more up to date. Basically, our data timeline is looking at, right now, we're collecting and cleaning the data as well as preparing some of our basic findings. And as we get into later in the summer, we'll be doing a lot of that projection and household populations, and our preliminary reporting you can expect in August. Engagement is a little more exciting. This is a place where we're hopefully going to have some help from you folks as well as from your staff members. So we've broken out our engagement techniques into two key categories. The first is stakeholder facing. So this is engagement that is focused on people who have specific experience within the housing sector or who represent specific population groups. So for that, we're using three techniques. The first is an elected officials questionnaire, which some of you, I believe, have already filled out. And those of you that haven't, I will be putting up a reminder at the end of this. So hopefully you can take some time and fill it out over the next few days. Key informant interviews, these are one-on-one conversations with important housing stakeholders in the region, and then focus groups. So example stakeholder groups would be, elected officials and hereditary leadership, housing and social service providers. In Tofino, obviously, the Housing Corp is a really important stakeholder in your community. Island Health, the Tla-o-qui-aht Health Network is a really important stakeholder where a lot of those different sort of social service people sit at one table. We'll also be looking at key employers, nonprofit housing agencies, landlords, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of really great places to go, and your staff have been really generous giving us some great places to start. The public-facing side is a little different. These we're doing through surveys. So we're conducting a community survey for Tofino, which will be on Talk Tofino, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, and we can start pushing that out to your community members. And as well, we're doing a tourism and hospitality survey. So this is going to be a sort of separate survey from the main one. We're developing it to ask some explicit questions around tourism and hospitality industries and the specific needs in those communities. We'll be distributing it through key employer networks, through Facebook groups, through those sort of sites where seasonal workers may regularly check to see about housing in Tofino. So that's kind of where we're going with that. We'll have surveys, as I said, on Talk Tofino. There'll also be paper copies available at your municipal office for those that want them. And we'll be distributing and advertising them through a bunch of different means, including probably Facebook, but that'll come. Our timeline for that, again, starting now, we're well into it. We've begun our process of identifying and scheduling key informant interviews. We've also got a draft of the survey that's been vetted by your staff and should be appearing on Talk Tofino hopefully in the next couple of weeks. Throughout the month of July, we'll continue to conduct our interviews. We'll start scheduling some focus groups, and we'll be doing some of that survey advertising and outreach. And then lastly, into August, this is when we kind of save some time and do a bit of engagement analysis. So who have we talked to so far? What do the gaps look like? Who do we need to make sure that we're focusing on to get a complete picture of housing in your community? And we'll be doing our preliminary reporting in August, as well as a complete engagement summary report for you in September. And so that's about it. Next steps, as I mentioned, the elected officials questionnaire is available now. We're going to leave it online until the 9th, so that's Friday. If you can fill it out before then, that would be great. As well, you can expect a progress report in late summer. And if you have any questions at all, please do not hesitate to reach out. My information is included on the an elected officials questionnaire, as well as your staff's information, Erin. And anything that you need or have any questions you have about this study, we'll be happy to take some time and chat about it with you. So that's it. I'm happy to take any questions that you've got about this study. I really appreciate your time this evening, and hopefully we can have a productive discussion, and ideally I'll get to see you in person sometime in the next couple of months.
Thanks, Sandy. That was great. Any questions from council? Mayor Law.
Hi, Sandy. Thanks for that. Really look forward to this this project. I do have a couple questions. The 2016 survey, that's the last data set. Is that data going to be augmented by the public surveys, or is that sort of set in stone, and then the public input is going to be sort of lived experiences and other evidence?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Mayor Law. So there are a couple of ways we can do the survey. In some circumstances, In the past, we have tried to treat it more like a community census, where we're actually collecting demographic indicators similar to what you would find on the Canadian census as a way of getting an interim data point. Unfortunately, in my experience, it just has not been that effective, and we have struggled to get enough survey responses to make it a statistically sound sort of analysis point. So what we do now is we sort of do a half and half. There are a few places where we ask folks to indicate, generally their income, generally their household costs, those sort of key data points that we can get. But mostly what the survey gives us is that long form. What are the issues that you're seeing in your community? Are there any issues that affect you or your family? Are there any suggestions or solutions that you can think of to help? Like those sorts of questions. And, I have found that though the 2016 data is not perfect, it is enough for us to understand the trends that are happening in your community, and that lived experience data really is our way of saying, like, this is what the data says, but folks are telling us that things have gotten progressively worse in the past 5 years, or that they're paying more than they did 5 years ago, those sorts of things. So, I think we could have gone that census route, but this is, for me, the most effective way to go about it. And I think that we'll be able to get a really good picture of housing in your community, even though that 2016 data point is kind of our last data point. There's also, I should say, the BC legislation, I think about 45 of the 65 indicators are from the census, but a lot of them, about 20, are from more immediate data sets. So assessment data, things like that, and those are all collected yearly. So we do have some up-to-date data, even though a large part of it is from 2016.
Thanks very much.
Okay, I have a question. Sandy, it seems to be focused on individual communities, yet I wonder if there's any idea of seeing what is needed collectively. Where I'm going with this is I'm thinking about essential workers, such as childcare workers, paramedics, whatever, which affects all the communities in the area. So is there any thought of looking at that?
Absolutely. Thanks, Councillor McMaster. That is a really great question. And I think your staff have absolutely thought of this, right? The reason why you are doing a regional assessment instead of an individual assessment is because housing needs do not understand or respect municipal borders and boundaries, right? There are issues in Ucluelet and issues in ACRD-C are going to spill into Tofino and vice versa. And it is important to take a regional lens when looking at housing. So I think we were absolutely planning to make a comment on regional issues, both in terms of different joint operations that you can do moving forward, or joint policy initiatives you can do moving forward, but also in terms of like where people are commuting to for work and things like that. And to speak to your comment on essential workers, absolutely. I think that one of our key informants that we're going to go out to is the hospital, looking at how their staff are finding housing. Is there trouble with recruitment and retention because of housing? Things like that. I think another great place to look is to your school board and your school district. So looking at how teachers are able to find housing, if they're able to stay, what's retention and recruitment like for that? So yeah, our expectation is that essential workers are going to be a key component of both our key informant as well as our focus group sectors, and hopefully we'll get a good response from our survey as well.
Great, thank you very much. Any more questions from council? Councillor Thick. You're muted.
Thank you. I think Councillor Steer was before me, but should I just carry on? Thanks, Andy. A good beginning for us. And I think even though the data is a little bit old, I think that it can be used and extrapolated from. I just wondered if you're going to ask questions about how to gather information about the short-term rental and the impact on housing. Is that part of it?
Yeah, definitely. So one thing that we did have initially is there's a couple of services that allow us to purchase information on short-term rentals, but because it's an issue in your communities and because you've got a lot of short-term rentals across the West Coast region, your staff has actually done a lot of the work collecting that information for us. So we're absolutely going to be analyzing that. We've got some ways that we like to use in our analysis framework, but we will be working with your staff to make sure that we're delivering the information that they need, that they don't already have and that they don't already know about. Short-term rentals is definitely an interesting one, right? And a lot of communities are struggling to deal with them, but I think you're already well ahead of the game in terms of sort of cataloging and understanding the impact that short-term rentals have on your community. And as a sort of resort community or vacation community, you're in a different boat, right? They're not necessarily taking units out of your rental stock. Maybe in some cases they are, but that's kind of the information that we'll be able to look at is, how many units is this potentially taking out of your rental stock? How many transitioned during the pandemic in 2020 to be rentals, and how many didn't? Those sorts of things. So yeah, we'll definitely be looking at the information that you collect and working with your staff to develop an analysis framework that allows you to make informed policy and enforcement decisions.
Yeah, thanks. And I mean, on the next report that we're receiving, it talks pretty clearly about the increase in secondary homes, and it doesn't say exactly what percentage of those involve vacation rentals, but we know anecdotally that is definitely the case in our community. So I just was hoping that there would be a bit more in-depth information from your side about what you find and how it is definitely a very strong prong in tackling the whole housing situation here. So thank you for that.
Councillor Steer, I can't see you, but I believe you have a question.
Thank you, Councillor McMaster. Thank you, Andy. I think many of my questions were answered by Mr. McKay. I just wanted to ask about you pointed out the limitations of the quantitative data, and that was clearly articulated. And some of the methodologies for that quantitative or more subjective information, and I look forward to seeing, because I gather it's going to be quite a difficult task to garner some of that information from that very subjective level at the community level. And I am looking forward to the report to see as many of us on council and the community know the answers to many of these questions that you're bringing forward. In fact, it'll be very interesting to see if your report corroborates what I'm sure everybody sitting at this table is very, very well aware of. So thank you for the report.
Any more questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much, Sandy. I look forward to the report and hope we get to meet you in person.
Definitely. Thanks all. We'll see you soon.
Okay, moving on. Item 6.2, West Coast Land Use Study Report from Community Sustainability.
Good afternoon, Council. I'll just share my screen. I think you can all see it now. At least Zoom is telling me you can see it. This presentation is going to be fairly brief. The report itself is fairly brief, but it's a lot of information within the report itself. So I'm going to just try to break it down as much as I can, but it's one of the reports that you may have questions as the months and years go by, and happy to try to dig down deeper through that over the years to come. So today I'll be presenting on the West Coast Land Use Demand Study on the brand new presentation. Again, similar to the housing needs assessment that Sandy was just speaking of, this is a regional project with all of the same communities involved. Its intent was to consider current and future land use scenarios and possibilities over the next 30 years. It will become a companion piece to the housing needs assessment. So these would be two documents that are probably used together for years to come and help ourselves and as well as the region make future land use decisions and also decisions about infrastructure. I there's a lot of meat to this report, but in the end, what comes out of it is that there's a significant demand for land use and development. I don't think that's new for anybody here at this table, but it's nice sometimes to have a number about that and to really understand, how great that need from the outside coming towards us is. The project identifies gaps regionally, so development and land use is not the same across our region, and the report helps to identify those gaps and also to start addressing some of the equity issues that come out of the gaps between our communities. It's really important to understand for the study that it comes from an economic or real estate perspective. It's not a roadmap to how we should develop, but it's one more perspective, another tool in our toolbox to use as reviewing, our larger plans like official community plans or development cost charge bylaws, and to sort of put a number on that. I think it will be helpful for us and the region for our future infrastructure planning to identify what areas we currently have servicing and what areas would need additional servicing. And I think this probably one of the more important pieces of this report is it's a basis for our regional discussions and increased cooperation. So this sort of feeds into, for Tofino or our building inspection service, we work closely with the CORRESPONDENCE on our transit studies and just this idea of having a more regional approach to some of these big issues and putting all our energy in the same direction. And this gives us at least a framework to start having some of those discussions. I'm not really going to get, again, I said, into the details, but one of the ways that the consultants looked at this was to develop 4 build-out scenarios, and there could be, an infinite amount of build-out scenarios, but we just took 4 that were, different enough that would give us a kind of idea whether the data we're collecting, how it would relate to the real world. And so again, it was assessing land use mix and development achieved only through the development of land with existing services. One was directing development away from Tofino due to its limitations on infrastructure capacity to other communities that have already been serviced up to a level 2, which is related to the report. And this came out of the conversation about what happens if Tofino is at limits. We're at limits of growth OCP, and if we're not going to develop, what does that look like for the rest of the region? How does that work? There was a scenario for prioritizing development on all First Nations lands and service lands and other jurisdictions up to service level 4. And then basically the 4th one was understanding the maximum growth that can be achieved with the current land use supply. So kind of, if we just decided to do everything that this report says people want to do, what would that look like? And again, none of these are roadmaps for our future. They're just ways to understand the data and points of conversation. So what does it mean for us? There are 5 recommendations coming out of the study. The first is to develop a regional strategy for sustainable growth. I think this is probably one of the most important pieces out of this report. This report sets the stage for this conversation, and regional growth strategies, obviously are larger than Tofino. They're regional. You can have sub-regional strategies for areas. So we could have a sub-regional strategy for the West Coast region. And the idea behind these of regional growth is basically sustainable growth. So how do we adjust our growth patterns as a region to be more sustainable, and that's a bigger discussion, but probably something that it should start being considered over the next couple of years. Other ways we can use this report is to develop policies to support coordinated development of existing industrial and commercial lands between jurisdictions. So again, that's the idea of like if Tofino doesn't have any more room for industrial lands or commercial lands, is there some other way that we can support other areas of the community of the region for that? And do we start talking about these policies at a regional level? To clarify development goals and streamline development process. Again, there's a lot of information here. This sort of helps us in our larger planning processes. I've already spoke to this number 4, which is reviewing opportunities to coordinate service delivery and revenue sharing between jurisdictions. And again, we see that again through the transit program, our building inspection service, the housing needs assessment, and I'm sure there are many other ones. Another one obviously would be the sewer trunk to Tla-o-qui-aht and Essa-Wista. And basically, the fifth one is to explore development potential and raise awareness for key emerging sectors. So there's a lot of, we field a lot of questions from developers and real estate agents about what's happening out here. We've already probably given out this document, half a dozen times at least for now, for people who don't understand what's happening on the West Coast and what are some of the development considerations that they may face, and also in terms of economic development, what opportunities are out there. And so part of this report was funded through Island Coast Economic Trust, ICE-T, and from that basis, I'm trying to understand what is happening in the area and what the opportunities may be. All of those recommendations are predicated on us as a region, but specifically us as Tofino, having enough housing to support economic development and future growth. And so we have an OCP that focuses on that exact item, and we just want to make sure that over the years to come that we maintain that focus on housing, because without more housing, obviously we couldn't grow economically anymore. And I think we almost know that even today, this summer, there is a significant amount of restrictions on businesses to operate at their full capacity because of a lack of staff housing. So in terms of next steps, I think in the next year or two, it would be interesting to initiate a conversation about sustainable growth at the West Coast Committee level. And I think that is a role for council to consider and to play. In terms of staff and council, prioritizing the development of residential housing, as everything else is predicated on that, is important. And longer term, we would want to develop coordinated regional land use policies, perhaps under a regional growth strategy framework. We want to consider streamlining our development process. We have a grant application in with the province about that exact item already. And then again, taking advantage of regional coordination opportunities. And I think we're well positioned to do that and have taken advantage of those in the past. And I would also like just to point out that these sort of longer term items are the things that our senior planner, now that we'll have two planners in the department, will be able to take on and work through into work plans. So that's one of the benefits I see again of that position, which went live 3 days ago. So really happy for council's support on that. And that's it for, I have happy to take any questions or comments. And
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Can you take your presentation down so we can see everybody?
Yep.
Okay, council, is there any questions for Aaron or comments? Councillor Steer was first, I believe.
Thank you, Councillor McMaster. Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate the report. And in your one of the key takeaways was the development of that regional growth strategy, and I would agree that.
Sorry, there's a bit of an echo. Maybe if somebody else could mute Councillor McMaster and Aaron.
Is that better, Councillor Chalmers? Great. So. Within that regional growth strategy, you did mention about a sub-regional, and I would agree that that the importance of maybe that sub-regional group is important. We do have that framework through the West Coast Committee of the ACRD. Within there, we should recognize some of the limitations within that and be something that we at least could work with as a framework. At this point, there's the non-inclusion of the non-treaty First Nations at a voting level. So that would have to be worked out because their participation would be critical in those conversations for sure. And the other point that I did have, and you did bring it up in the report, and you reiterated it here. It was in the report. You indicate that this is one perspective, one viewpoint, economic and land use. And I do want to point out that it should only be one of those documents that we'll be looking forward, or strategies to be implementing, because through the OCP, which there's been a tremendous amount of work on, but also I think emerging work that have been in discussion with, which I think will be critical in informing these decisions, is, for example, our natural asset management, and looking at through a slightly different lens as not only what land is available, but what the land might be most appropriate for. And that's a much larger discussion, but it should certainly be used in informing that larger discussion. So I do see this as one component of a bigger picture before we make any of those critical decisions. But I thank you, and I know that this is an important part of that overall picture. So thank you, Aaron, and I hope to continue that discussion around that, maybe that sub-regional working group on this. Thanks.
Councillor Fick, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Aaron, for this report. I had two, I guess, maybe deficiencies in the report that I wanted to maybe just point out and see if others found the same. And then I had two comments that I'd like to make maybe later after we go around. But one thing that became apparent, it says on page 65, but I don't know if that's of the report or maybe it's of our package. But one of the comments, which I thought was very good, was that there is more data needed from Tourism Tofino. It says in the report that we're approximating our numbers, our visitor numbers from the Pacific Rim Park. And it also says, quote, there's no, I think it says no reliable and recent data. So it's just a question for all that I think that we need to make sure that we have this data. We've got Tourism Tofino, we've got lots of available. I'm sure that these things could be found out. So I'm saying, you know, these numbers from Pac Rim, you know, 1.1 million and then 750,000 in different reports. We really need more recent and accurate and up-to-date data. So that's one of my concerns and gaps. And the second one was that this, one of the things that I felt was sort of missing was this sort of idea or this interface between the land and the sea. And I know that this is a land use study, but I think that it's worthy of, it's just worthy thinking about, because today, just coming back in, you know, into Tofino by water, I just noticed that, wow, this whole waterfront was hopping, and it made the four-way stop look like it was slow. But it was just, everything was going on. You know, the tugs were coming and going, the barges were coming and going, the sport fishermen were going out, the commercial guys were coming back, and there was all manner of recreational. So what I'm saying is how that impacts land use, I think, is that whole notion that we don't give much credence to, of that. Where is the parking, for example, for the people who are using recreational boating, and where is, you know, how do we facilitate that interface between the land and the sea? If we were Red Deer, it wouldn't matter. We just kind of stop, and you know, we don't have anything that we're going to or coming back from. But I think this notion of interface between a body of water and the land is not, you know, unless you're out on the water a lot, sometimes you don't think about that. So I just wanted to make that point and just say, you know, what is it that's happening there, and how does what's happening there affect what we talk about, for example, in terms of parking for boat trailers or people who are using boats. So I have two other comments. I'll wait till later. Thanks.
Through the chair, this is Nikki speaking. We're having some feedback, Councillor Fick, so it might be your microphone and pages hitting a microphone near your laptop. And just a reminder to council, if you are not speaking, please mute yourself, because if you're not using headphones, it does provide feedback to anyone that is listening when you're not muted. So thank you very much.
Maybe I could just comment on Councillor Thick's first point. I think, Councillor Thick, you have a crystal ball. One of my project sheets for next year that council will see through the budget process is a mobile census project to try to start, you know, as another way to try to get around this sort of data problem. And so it's going to come to council as a project with a number, and I'm working with a couple different consulting groups to see what we can do. And actually, Sandy from Macola was instrumental, and their partners at Turner Drake in helping me find out who I need to be talking to about that. And so, and it's something that it sounds like Tourism Tofino and Tourism Ucluelet and CBT and District Ucluelet are all interested in. So there may be another regional project on its way, and yeah, with the intent of trying to of cracking that nut.
Anyone else on council? Okay, I'll just make a comment before I pass it back to Councillor Thick. I thought the report was really good, Aaron. Two things. I think infrastructure limitations are going to put a pause on our development, which is probably a good thing. I think the second comment is during that pause, similar to what Councillor Steer was talking about, we're going to see a lot of things changing in terms of climate change with our knowledge increasing. And I think that's going to have an influence as to what we can develop and what we may want to develop. So I'd really like to think as this report being a sort of living report rather than just going onto the shelf. Any thoughts on that?
I echo everything you just said. I think that this report will be one of those reports that we go back to time and time again over the, definitely as in the next 5 years and to lead up to the NEOCP reviews. But it's a report that probably will want to get picked up and updated on a fairly regular basis, as well. So yeah, I think it will be a living report. I've just received some graphics from our floodplain consultants that will show some graphics of what will be flooded on a large storm in 100 years from now, and sort of gives you a kind of a pretty good visual of about where to put infrastructure now or where not to put it, I guess is more to the point. So that I'll be interested in sharing that report with council in the coming months, and but I think that's exactly I think you're exactly right, Councillor McMaster.
Thank you. Mayor Law, did you have a comment?
I did, but Councillor Thick was up first, unless you want me to go ahead.
I think you should go ahead because we haven't spoken yet.
Sure. I just want to concur with everything that Councillor McMaster, Councillor Thick, and Councillor Steer and Mr. Rogers have said. I just want to say, this was a very specific report with an economic perspective, and I just wanted to say that the very term economics, I think, will change in the next 10 or 15 years to start to look at all of these things. So just to put that in perspective, this is a very, probably already dated use of the term economics as we start to look at climate change, et cetera, et cetera. So in the interface of land and sea and the whole biosphere. So I just wanted to say that and just to thank everybody for everything they've contributed and to realize it is a very specific and in some cases limited report, but also useful.
Thank you. Councillor Thick.
Yeah, thank you. Because it's such a great conversation starter and a great report, I just wanted to mention again the short-term rental idea that's come up in the report, and in it says that the number of listings has increased by 75% between 2016 and 2020. There's higher occupational rates. I think it says 59%, and the average daily rate over the last 4 years. So it's just noting that there's just this huge increase in all of these things to do with short-term rental, but almost in the same paragraph it says, but the demand for single family houses has gone up. So I'm just saying from a community perspective, this spells trouble for us unless we're willing to tackle this in a more direct way. And I suppose from my point of view, I would like to shortly put in a notice of motion about having a fulsome discussion about short-term rentals and how we might deal with those more effectively going forward. So that's my comment on the short-term rental. And the only other comment I had was that, as noted in the report, the pressures from and the uncertainty from the TFN lands could certainly be a game changer in how we're planning to do things as well. So I found it incredibly useful, and I think that this report's going to serve us well, and it's going to be something that's very provocative for council too. So appreciate it.
Okay, if there's no more comments from council, I'll move the recommendation that the District of Tofino West Coast Land Use Demand Study attached as Appendix 1 to the staff report titled West Coast Land Use Demand Study dated July 5th, 2021 be received and discussed. Are there any objections? Seeing none, motion is carried. Moving on to item 6.3. Thank you, Aaron, by the way. Uh, 6.3 is a beach pay parking engagement summary and bylaw amendments. A report from Infrastructure and Public Works.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Fraser Work. I'm the Director of Infrastructure and Public Works for the district. And tonight I bring forward a report for Council's consideration related to an update on the engagement that has occurred as part of the beach pay parking initiative, as well as a proposed set of considerations and changes for Council en route to a bylaw change, which would be back in front of Council for adoption based on the directions received tonight, as well as some of the recommendations that are here for consideration. I'll start now and share my screen so that we can run through the presentation together. Sorry, just 1 second. I'll do my very best to keep the presentation to about 10 minutes or so. And so I'll go through it pretty quickly and then leave a bunch of time for questions and discussion afterwards. Just out of interest, can everyone see the shared screen in full screen mode right there? Okay, thanks, Mayor Law. So the purpose of this presentation and the report was to review and provide information to the public and council about the engagement that's happened thus far, to review the considerations and changes that stemmed from those engagement sessions and the discussions with the public, report back with a set of proposed changes that would then be reflected in bylaw amendments, and also highlight the next steps for the program overall. Some background information here is just the last couple of dates that we met in front of council. Obviously, we're involved in making sure that we can move forward with the program for an implementation for early August. And I'll talk a bit more about the latest dates there. And also to review the public engagement sessions and the improvements that continue as we have been planning and implementing different improvements as we go. As far as a summary on public engagement, we've held 3 Zoom town hall meetings for the public as open forums for both updates as well as discussions. A number of different stakeholder meetings that have been both via Zoom platforms as well as in-person meetings in the outdoors and stakeholder to staff meetings. We've updated and provided information via both our conventional webpage information as well as social media, as well as provided posters and information via some handouts to make sure that the most amount of people were aware and hope that we would get lots of attendance at those different sessions. We have been putting things in the public right away at both conventional downtown locations or around the community, as well as the beach accesses and the beach pay parking sites themselves. During those sessions, we heard a set of important themes, which I'll go through tonight, and I'll talk a little bit about the considerations that are outlined in the report. There's a lot more detail in the report, of course, so I'm going to go through this at a pretty high level of detail. More than happy to dive into any of these as council wishes. And I would review these, and I'll try to provide some high-level bullets that sort of encapsulate the issues that's captured here on the slide. So pay parking, I think one of the most dominant and consistent narratives within the public here in Tofino is that a lot of people support a pay parking initiative for the beaches, and especially for visitors. And I think a dominant part of the narrative is that many people in our community feel that they've been paying for that service for a long time, and it's now fit to be paid from the visitors that come to our community. And I think that's a very common narrative here in our town. There was lots of considerations, lots of commentary and correspondence that was directly about the need for improved parking design, configuration, and management not necessarily exactly about the introduction of paid parking, but just the fixes that are required throughout the system. And as council knows, we continue to make improvements on a weekly basis that are underway, and in some cases we've made interim improvements, and we'll go back and make more steady state ones. One of the other most important and consistent themes was there was a general consensus that there's a lack of enforcement going on currently that fails to clean up the mess that is daily parking patterns in and around the beach locations, and that the enforcement does cost money and is sorely required to make sure that the system works better overall. A lot of people were engaging with us, especially about a month ago, trying to get more information just about how the paid parking would work. Lots of commentary and questions on the earliest days of our engagement about who will pay, how will you pay and get in the system, where will pay parking be applied to, would it include some of the roads that are along the beaches, and those were some of the themes that were then highlighted in our frequently asked questions and updated on our web pages, and we'll do another update following tonight's discussion. Another theme that came through clearly was that the proposed rate considerations early doors made about the parking program considered a higher premium for businesses that use beaches as their daily business location. A lot of discussions with different stakeholders who are most prominent at the beach locations, like Sur Schools, but also those questions and comments were engaged with other service providers like kayak touring companies, photographers, wedding planners, and professionals, and different surf instructors or SUP surf instructors that take people to the beach on a regular frequency, and wanted to know more about why the rates were set there, and in some cases agreed that they were too high, and that there might be a better way for us to control or manage the beach as the public good in the space that they use for business gains or business interests. Lots of discussions around that. That's in your portfolio of correspondence as well as the report. Some other themes that came out early were concerns about restricting overnight parking along Lynn and Chesterman roads. Of course, this aims to reduce the instances of illegal beach camping and illegal overnight stays in vehicles, which is quite common. And some people who are especially long-term tenants of those areas had very little flexibility with respect to who they parked or where they parked and what guests they had. And we've proposed a set of considerations and options moving forward in this regard. The Tofino brand was also brought up as potentially something that didn't align very naturally with the regular corporate parking service model and an urban parking model. And that's something that we've taken forward in our considerations about the look and feel of the infrastructure, the assets, as well as the revenues that come from parking will be put to the greatest good for our community, and potentially allow us to use our funds or to gain funds and use them in a way that provides a consistent benefits across our resident base and our businesses here in town. So the discussion that I would offer up based on some of those issues are summarized in the report in the section that follows the engagement. And what I want to highlight here is just some kind of nuggets or elements of where staff have discussed this or debated this and what the thinking is currently. There was a lot of discussion about the views of long-standing taxpayers that have maybe carried some more of the burden for longer about the use of the beaches and some of the busy summer pressures that happen in the parking realm. And there was a sense that in many cases they felt most entitled to a discounted or a subsidized parking permit. We obviously have seasonal residents here in town, some that last for only short months and others that come back and make this their home. But there is a distinctive difference between people that have been here for a long time, some seasonal workers, all of which could be considered local if today their address is Tofino, and who should be given access to such reductions in cost or benefits. There was a lot of discussion, and one of the phrases which I thought was interesting, of course, was we shouldn't pay to go to the beach. And I've highlighted that in the report, saying that no one's asking you to pay to go to the beach. They're saying that you should pay to use parking services, which cost a lot of money to actually maintain, run, and upkeep. Biking, walking, and carpooling in different modes would always be encouraged, as they pose the most amount of benefits for the most amount of people. But it is important to distinguish that while parking for the beach has previously been free for everyone, that comes with its ills, and those are what we're trying to manage here today. Parking affordability, I would offer that I think the parking prices as currently set are more of a symbol of the high cost of living here in Tofino, and any additional cost would be, of course, considered an aggravation of that high cost of living and has to be taken seriously and is considered in those sort of phrasings or and the turn of phrase that I've used there is, instead of it being maybe an actual affordability issue, it might just be a symbol of the high cost of living here, which has to be carefully managed in itself. I did want to highlight also that the customized system, which has these different eligibility criteria, whether that's ACRD, UKI, people that live here in Tofino, and proving residency, as we've always highlighted with council, and council has always highlighted back to us, proving what is a local, proving what is a resident, and proving where someone lives in order to get a subsidized rate, comes with its, of course, administrative overheads and needs to be carefully managed as we go through these types of systems in the past. Of course, we're offering up these, and I would suggest that one of the most important areas of these savings is in the change management aspect of this program, which is to enter into the pay parking realm here in Tofino at the beaches in a slow, in a slower way and in a reasonable, fair, and low cost way, especially at the start. Business vehicles, I think that there's a strong argument to have a flat rate for business vehicles using the beaches. Many do, many don't. And then we've always said in the April report, we highlighted that it would be best if staff returned back to council with some more information that talked about how would we best regulate these types of businesses that rely on the public spaces for their business activities. That was received, I think, with some favor by council, if I would interpret that correctly. And I think it's important that we look at that option as another option, not just the parking rate, which more of an indirect management of beach use by these different businesses. I would also highlight the very significant change that beach pay parking will introduce for the first time, which means every person that goes to the beach will be paying to park there, or pay their share to park in a carpool scenario, and the vehicles themselves will our staff is recommending will also be paying, and that is quite a bit different than it is today. So we would obviously see, or like to see, a change just based on that simple change that would come in 2021 with the proposed set of introductions. Moving down through my list, I think this is the last slide on this, and then we're going to get into recommendations, which is most amount of our vehicle stalls are designed for vehicles that are less than 20 feet. And we see some messes that are occurred when larger vehicles try to park in those zones. North Chesterman, South Chesterman, 1431, Pacific Rim Highway and I guess Helleson and Tonquin are very, very important examples of where the stalls do not house vehicles that are much longer than this, and we need to carefully manage where vehicles that are longer go. And I think no matter what, we have to make sure that that's part of our system going forward. Future rates in here, we've talked about the fact that the initial year we've set the rates more of a change management alignment, but should always be fair and reasonable as we go forward. And I'm sure we'll have some discussion on that tonight. Physical improvements, like I said, are ongoing. Beach parking restrictions, I would offer up for council to make sure that the dialogue is complete, that right now we see a number of visitors of short-term vacation rentals and visitors of properties park on the road because it may be easier or more convenient to do so. In some cases, for example, the multi-use pathway across from where Howard empties onto Lynn Road, we see this quite a bit overnight and every day. That puts vehicles in a situation where they cross over a pedestrian amenity and park along the boulevard, which has wear and tear on public property. These types of patterns or these types of behaviors would be highly discouraged when we move to these more controlled or more organized parking systems, and they would essentially be a casualty of our recommended system going forward, which I think has many benefits. I think most of those cars should be nudged towards private property, which has been part of every single report that I've delivered on this subject, and we need to make sure that the abuse of the public realm is something that we try to walk away from as best possible. The overnight Lynn Road and Chesterman, I would say that there is a legitimate few cases that have been brought forward to staff for consideration that would suggest supporting some overnight parking along those is reasonable. Adding overnight parking enforcement would add essentially 2 or more FTEs to the system at a cost of potentially well over $100,000, which I would say is a high price to pay for enforcement where we don't want all the illegal camping that comes with it. So I think it seems reasonable that we would be in a position to provide a paper, a hanger that can, a decal that can go in a car, which has been authorized to access that type of an overnight service, but it would be something that was quite inconvenient, to be honest, and also priced in a way that would help people find alternative arrangements on their property wherever possible, but still provide something that was reasonable when it was needed as an essential service for those individuals. Frank Island parking is another interesting one where we have residents and visitors that access the middle Chesterman parking area along where Lynn and Chesterman meet. These are residents that I've had discussions with directly about the shift to both a pay parking model as well as a potential overnight restricted model. In some cases, the residents there haven't made alternative arrangements to find parking elsewhere. The system is yet to roll out, and I would suggest that we ease into this restriction of no overnight at that location and provide potentially a couple of spots where overnight parking would be authorized with the applicable permit at the applicable cost. This would provide a small administrative burden on the district to administer such a thing as required. It would recoup some of the costs for the use of our services that Frank Island residents and visitors enjoy. And it could be managed somewhat overnight by the sort of on the edges of bylaw enforcement windows to the point where only recognizable vehicles that had that permit in the windshield would be accepted and not ticketed. So I think this basically turns overnight parking along Lynn and Chesterman into a rarity. And that's the recommendation set that staff are bringing forward today. So closing out the last couple of slides here, one thing we did as staff group decide was to extend the expiry date of the first year's annual pass to a shared anniversary date of 31st of October. That would mean that if you registered for a pass this year, it would be valid until next Halloween of 2022, which I think has a few different benefits administratively, somewhat easier to manage than having a random or variable expiry dates. Also easier to communicate and manage from a public and communications perspective. And what it does do is it gets everybody that's in the system through another summer without having to register again, which is a high level of convenience, especially for that first year. And I think that is an interesting one because I think most people, if they start the parking system and register for a permit in July, wouldn't necessarily want to be doing it again in March or April or May, that kind of thing. It would come up pretty fast. So this is a consideration, especially as I think we look at what we would charge in year 2 and some of those things that would be back in front of council for future consideration. Staff are also recommending that we rationalize and align all vehicle permits registered to a business to $120 per year for the first year, and then return back to council with a set of considerations for future years. But that is essentially aligned with if you live outside of the ACRD and you're buying an annual pass, as well as you can go to the kiosk, type in your license plate and pay for it right at the station, and has zero administrative overhead because it's an annual pass that's available for the general public. As I mentioned in the last slide, we're recommending rare but physical passes for any overnight for Lynn and Chesterman and Frank Island. We're also offering up restricting vehicle lengths to a maximum for many locations around our parking infrastructure. We are recommending that we come back as per previous council reports where we were directed to come back via the financial planning process as a topic about how would we allocate parking revenues in the years to come. Which provides an informed and balanced discussion about all the different considerations that staff would wish to discuss with council. And that's what we're recommending again. And we would always suggest that we maintain Tofino brand by having that right professional and supportive attitude, aesthetics, as well as pricing, and our physical infrastructure should reflect the West Coast infrastructure that's in place in a lot of spots, which means wooden and timber designed kiosks, some of those things that might come in the fall after we get up and running. So we want to reflect all of that goodness that's already in the public realm. Future annual, I've left to the last year, and I would say that I've confused council probably a little bit and the public maybe with the report, which actually recommends it's $120 for year 2022-23. But I've always said a basic fare, and then staff are introducing the option for having rebates and incentives for locals to reduce that to potentially free. The report does say that long-standing taxpayers would be free moving forward, but with a basic fare for everybody else, which reduces the perceived inequity of people that have been here the longest versus people that are maybe transient, which is ripe for debate but is also something that we heard through our engagement process. A recommended set of details here that council has seen in many sort of incarnations or iterations before. Just to highlight, we're talking about hourly restrictions, pay parking from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., $3 first hour, $3 each additional hours, $12. All of those are transferable between locations. $12 all-day access pass is very affordable, and in that case, and in most cases, this would beat the affordability set or comparisons in the park, although it's not a like for like because they have a different kind of setup there. The annual beach parking permit would be $0 for 21-22 for Tofino and local First Nations, $60 for ACRD and others, including Ucluelet, which has been part of council suggested changes in the past, which is still not reflected here and up for discussion tonight. $120 for the general permits and $120 for business vehicles. We have, through the last set of discussions, included Thornburg Crescent as it acts as an extension of Chesterman Beach Road physically and practically from a parking perspective, and would be smart to, as far as my professional opinion would be, to include that in our pay parking zone. No parking between 11 p.m. and 6, although that kind of gives that 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. as almost like a grace hour. And then and no trailers along these zones in any locations, because that takes up space that would otherwise be revenue space, potentially has safety issues, and of course doesn't work in a lot of spaces, which would be difficult to manage. No overnight parking without a temporary residential permit, and no parking on the boulevard, like I've talked about before, with some other applicable parking laws that are currently in the bylaw today. Last two slides, the next steps: finalize infrastructure preps, continue our communications and engagement where required, test our registration system and open it. The latest feedback that we've got as of Friday afternoon is that we're looking at opening our registration on the 26th of July, nominally open for 2 weeks before we start our parking. So we're looking at maybe the 9th of August as the earliest start date right now if things come together, which is a little bit later than when the report published a couple of days before, as we get more and up-to-date information from our partners. And that is all, and I think I went over 10 minutes. I do apologize. I'll unshare and move to the tile screen so we can now have our discussion. Thanks very much for your attention thus far.
Thank you, Fraser. Questions from council. Councillor Chalmers had a hand up first.
Thank you. I have a question and 2 comments. So the first question is, it was in the report about bike racks, and I'm just wondering what the priority is for that. I think especially considering one of the ideas of the goals of this is to get more people to bike or whatever, and sorry, my words today. And especially North Chesterman's, I know there is a struggle there, and so making that as easy as possible for people to not be in their vehicles.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Chalmers, and through the mayor. We've got a couple of new bike racks that just arrived from our suppliers that are in the yard as of Saturday afternoon. I think North Chesterman is actually top of the list, but I'll have to confirm with Ms. Froment about that. We have plans to extend the bike racks in almost all locations to make them either covered or more numerous or voluminous as far as their capacity. And so we're working on that project, and April is sort of spearheading a lot of that work. We're moving some of our solid waste receptacles back to the parking frontage location as we get ready for future years, having more streams and more sorting facilities that would be best housed nearest to where the vehicles can have access. And that's also freeing up a little bit more space and reallocating that space to where we can put bike racks. So I don't have specific timings of when each will be installed, but it is definitely part of our plans.
That answers my question. And then in regards to the 6 a.m., I'm not a morning person, but I do know there are a lot of people that go out at sunrise for beach walks or surfs. Would the 6 a.m., especially in the summer months, be hindrance to that?
It's currently how most signage is posted around the district right now. And I think if I was to offer up an uninformed sort of opinion, my guess was that was done in order to dissuade and provide a window where parking restrictions were clear to dissuade against overnight camping. As a surfer, and of course seeing lots of people out in the morning, lots of people continue to enjoy, even though those restrictions say no parking at that time. So I guess the question would be, do we soften it to 5 a.m. and then does that make enforcement a little bit longer as at the start of the bylaw shifts in the busy summer period? So I think for the most part, the only issues that I see enforcement, and I'll go back and confirm this with the head of protective services, but is the where there's quite obvious overnight camping going on, those are where the enforcement begins. And in most cases, that's as far as we get to pre 8 a.m.
Okay, thank you. And then my one comment before everybody move on is in regards to your questions. I guess it was a question to council about longevity and access for free passes, or how long have you been local? And I really do not like the conversation of who's more local, how long you've been here. I don't think it does a service to the community. I also think whether you've been here a month and you're contributing to the community, or you've been here 10 years, it's just a blink in the eye compared to the tens of thousands of years that the First Nations have. And I think, even just having the conversation of who's more local really pulls us apart. So that's my view on that.
Thank you, Councillor Chalmers. I have Councillor Thick next, followed by Mayor Law.
Thank you. I think, first of all, kudos to you, Fraser, work for all the, I've seen lots of people proactively out and about and doing things, and even 2 nights ago on Chesterman's, they were running the I don't know what it is, the ATV, but it was making a difference, and people were responding in a positive way. So I think I really like the whole direction that this is taking. And just the only three things that I sort of had a comment about was, one was the overnight parking, and your comment about Lynn and Chesterman. And for me personally, I think that if we allow that to happen, I think those properties are half acre, are they not? And I mean, if you can't do what you're doing on your property, then I don't know, you got to make it work, is my feeling. And I think that people in town would then come back and have the same argument. Well, I have an STR and I do this and I have that. I have long-term. I just think it's going to snowball. So for me personally, I would say I would not like to encourage any locals for more overnight parking. I understand the dilemma, but that's just how I feel. And as to the Frank Island dilemma, could also could the people on Wickeninish Island, for example, do they have, because they're in the ACRD, are they not? Do they have access to passes or, close parking too? It's just, where do we draw the line? And so I realize that's a bit of a conundrum, and they've had a short-term rental there, and they've had lots of free parking up to this point, but yeah, I don't know what to say about Frank Island. I just wonder if the people on Wickeninish or elsewhere are going to start to, again, blur the lines and ask for more and more. So I don't know if you have a comment about that. And then just to reiterate the allocation of resources question, which I think the Long Beach Chamber of Commerce President Laura McDonald referred to in her letter, where she said that we would like to, or we think it's good to make clear where the funds will be directed rather than general revenue. And so I just, with recreation being such a high priority here, I think we really need to give some thought. There's absolutely no revenue stream or even possible revenue stream from the government for, to help a recreational facility get off the tracks here. And we really need more recreation indoor for people and kids in our community. So that's my vote on that. And maybe you have a question, comment on the overnight for Lynn, Chesterman, or Frank for me, if others feel the same. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Thick. I'll just offer, I guess, one comment in response to your comments. The Frank Island has some similarities to offshore parking needs that happen elsewhere, whether that's Wick or in the inlet or up north. It's just unfortunately smack dab in the middle of where we're putting paid parking in for beach locations, which is maybe a bit more competitive than some other spots. But we definitely have high parking demand in some areas where offshore parking currently exists. And I think as we move forward, we want to make sure that, as you say, that we draw the line in a way, in a place that doesn't create other issues or inequities or perceptions of those. As far as the revenue, I would offer up to council that the highlighting where the revenues will be allocated was a real desire in the public to know and learn where the monies would go. And I understand and I believe that that's probably after knowing that locals were going to be given a benefit package with the free pass. The second question always came out is, can we decide now where the revenues will go? So I understand how powerful of a change management narrative that can be, and I also understand how important it is to the public and our community, especially because they have been doing without in some of these areas that now with a new revenue source could potentially make some headway. That all being said, I think we're a little ways away from being able to provide council with a set of thoughtful comments and considerations that we would hope council would consider. And I think that the conversation that happens at the staff group right now is understanding completely that there is not a lot of appetite to have this go back into general revenue, and that there is a strong appetite from the community to have this be allocated in a way that's going to provide the greatest good. And that is loud and clear. So we will be shaping our next set of considerations for council in that light.
Thank you. I think it's Mayor Law next, followed by Councillor Challenger and then Councillor Steer.
Thanks, Mr. Work. I just have a question. I've got a couple questions and a couple comments. One question is, during your report here, you said something that wasn't actually in the written report, and I just want some clarification. And somebody's got their microphone on, I believe, because I'm hearing feedback. Thanks. And that is that, no, help me. I was madly writing this down as you were speaking, that it had to do with the number of people in vehicles, and that you wanted to see each person pay. And then I think it said in the 2021 review, but I'm guessing that was the wrong date. Or if you could just clarify that, and then I have a couple other questions.
Thanks, Mayor Law. Yeah, sorry if I mixed up some wording there and confused things. I think the sentiment I was trying to convey was that there's definitely members of the community that brought forward concerns that businesses were profiting off of their commercialization of public spaces like the beach locations. Part of that conversation, through that conversation, there was a lot of stakeholders that expressed alignment or support for the pay parking, which would make sure that that space was now paid for by the visitors that were part of that business transaction. So what my comments, I think, meant to say was that now what we see is maybe a surf school comes, and with COVID, most people maybe weren't carpooling, and maybe let's say one lesson came and there was the surf school vehicle plus 8 other vehicles parking at the beach for free. What we're going to see automatically at the start of this program, as soon as it's up and running, is that each one of those vehicles that comes to the beach and the surf school vehicle will all pay, and that in itself is a very big change. And I think and in some cases, my impressions are that simple fact that the people that are coming to do that activity are now going to be paying is a satisfier for a lot of people in the community. The question of how much to charge for that kind of thing is another topic of conversation. And of course, some people will choose to carpool where they didn't before because they don't want to pay $12 or they would rather not pay $3 an hour or whatever sort of thing. And that'll free up space and availability for the other users that were otherwise circling the block waiting for a spot to open up. So I think my comments there were just that we will learn very soon in 2021 that's not a free sort of service or benefit or privilege anymore. It's a fee for service, and that will benefit those and also I think support a lot of people's disgruntlement with that particular issue.
Thanks for that. That makes it makes a lot of sense. I was a little confused because, of course, in the park you pay per person in the car, and that was not something new. Just a comment. I have a specific comment on the time, and then I got some more comments. But the 11 o'clock to 6 a.m. This is, of course, the first time I believe I've heard that one. And I know there is a 11 a.m. to 6 a.m. bylaw right now, but it's not really enforced. And I just want to point out that a lot of people, including myself, use the beach at midnight, especially when the phosphorescence is out, and go to the beach early at 5:30, 5 a.m. to get away from the crowds. And so the very, very last thing I would want to see is residents trying to get away from the crowds or access the beach in the middle of the night for things to be ticketed for that. That's an absolute no-go for me. Another comment is, and this, I just want to make a comment too, is that the framing of the argument for residents not paying as because people have paid taxes for a long time is not an argument that I've used. I've used a different argument for residents getting a free or near free pass, and even regional residents getting a near free pass. And that is not to do with taxes, but to do with access to the few amenities that we have, and the beach is one of them. And I know you say that it's not access to the beach with parking, but in reality, many people have to park in order to go to the beach, especially with families and stuff like that. So I see it as a way of paid parking is not adding an amenity, it's adding a barrier to amenity in some ways. And so that was the argument I would have for giving residents a different deal than visitors. And another point, comment, I want, maybe you can comment on this, is the idea that $120 annual pass is somehow a symbol of unaffordability, that it in itself is not really a number of consequence. And I actually have quite a problem with this. Residents have made it very, very clear in the last couple of elections and throughout my conversation about this that there's few amenities in Tofino, and that Tofino needs to start focusing, staff and council and mayors need to start focusing on community residents. And in this case, we're not adding an amenity, but we're charging or preparing to charge residents for something they already have, which is parking near the beach. And so to say that, $120 is a symbol, but then to at the same time say, we're going to respond to businesses by listening to them and lowering their number, in a sense. I think it was originally 300 or more, and now it's 120, because that is a real cost. But to residents, it and maybe I'm paraphrasing this a little differently, a little more perhaps than you intend, but to say that businesses, paying $300 is a real cost, but residents paying $120 is just a symbol. And I reject that idea. And I just want to point out what will happen is that residents will pay $120 for access to parking to our beach. And in 2 years, Ucluelet is going to implement their pay parking, and then residents here, if they want to go to Ucluelet, are going to have to pay another $120 for Ucluelet, and they're going to have to pay for the park pass as well. And all of a sudden, that symbol, $120 becomes $300, $400 or whatever, and that is a very significant barrier to access to amenities, which are really for enjoyment and health and recreation. So that's my point for that, and my pitch for not only expanding it to the region, like I've said before, but also to make sure that the argument for residents getting a lower rate is not always couched in who pays more taxes, but who, residents here having access to a very, very vital amenity. That's my comments. I don't know if you want to answer those, but.
Thanks, Mayor Law. Yeah, maybe I'll offer up a few items, maybe just for clarity's sake. Sorry, staff were just vacuuming and I didn't lock the door there. So, yeah, my intention was never, of course, to disrespect the significance of any cost on someone's monthly or annual bills. And those are important and serious all in their own right. I think that as I was engaging, I was having conversations with the public about parking costs and affordability issues, and about how parking is currently being funded. And right now, a fare free parking system as currently exists is paid for, as the report suggests, in a combination of utility prices for pumping water around and pumping sewage around, buildings and facilities, staff that clean those building and facilities and maintain the parking lots and repair the asphalt surfaces and those materials and those supplies. All of that right now is being socialized on the community and the businesses here through taxation, utility rates, and some other funding sources, a little bit of RMI and some other sources. Those costs right now are currently being paid for by the people in this community, and I think that a lot of the conversation kind of steered, in some cases, away from this. I'm being dinged with this potential future dollar value and what it costs right now, but it's invisible because no one's aggregated and advertised it. The other parts of the conversation about the importance of the amenity, of course I agree with that sentiment, that the beach is a really important amenity and one of our unique and most important ones for all of our public and community members. That being said, it's the parking parts of that, accessing the beach and accessing the adventures and the lifestyle choices down there are actually so competitive and in such high demand that it's run amok. And in order for it to get back organized, some believe, and I'm one of them, that we use user pay services for all kinds of other things that we access in our lives, and it provides a value exchange for that, and also it provides an equity for a person, like example, a mother, with this family who choose to go on her bike would then be paying the same as someone who parks there every day, which is another inequity that we would potentially wish to avoid or consider in our models. So I think fair and reasonable and base rate is still what this staff person recommends going forward, although I understand and value the comments that it rubs up against the amenity and the access to amenity without that barrier that you talk of, and actually in a way that is different from it has been for generations. So I think this program is about how do we balance those things carefully and thoughtfully in order to get the things that we want from the system and actually stop getting the things that we don't want from the system. And what that balance is and where that sweet spot is the considerations before council. In some cases, I can tell you my view and my perspective on it, and I can have someone else in a public engagement session that I've never met before tell me their view, which I agree with 99% of it, but I still find myself right on the other side of that one line that suggests that I think we should still pay a basic rate for it. So I think I hear and understand the comments. Again, I meant no disrespect by suggesting that there's an affordability symbol. I just looked at the math when it comes to, owning a basic vehicle for a year is X amount of dollars, and this makes up a very small percentage of that. Is this an affordability issue or is it something else? And I think in most cases, the change is a factor in how people perceive that additional cost, and also the fact that it's an additional cost and no one wants any more additional cost is a factor as well.
Thanks.
Councillor Challenger.
Thank you. Thanks, Fraser, for the report, and I am glad to see progress on it and to see a lot of the community engagement as well as some of this great discussion and questions from council members. I had a couple of questions on clarity about a couple of things, and one was it's really clear to see how pay parking will be implemented in the lots on Chesterman, but will the road, Lynn Road and Chesterman Beach Road, also have pay parking units installed along the road, or are those just going to be delineated as to where you can park but not charged? The second question was, I saw somewhere in the report about each person with a pass having the ability to have up to 3 vehicles, and I'm not sure if I read that correctly, if I misunderstood that, but is that to say if a family purchased a pass, or people who live together, that that pass would be valid on multiple vehicles? And then lastly, I would echo the comments that Councillor Chalmers and Mayor Law brought up about the time frame and the no parking between 11 a.m. and 6, and just that does limit for a lot of people the accessibility to the beach within those hours, and I think that would be a concern in the future. So thanks, that's all.
Thanks, Councillor Challenger. Through the mayor, I'll just answer those one at a time. The intention is, of course, to move forward where Lynn and Chesterman Beach roads have the exact same look and feel and parking restrictions for payment as the surface lots on either end. So essentially, as long as you're parking along that road right of way, you're in a pay parking situation if you're a visitor. Of course, if you have your annual pass, you just park wherever you want without any inconvenience or restrictions based on payment. So Lynn and Chesterman function just like pay lots, except they're a roadway, and you park on only the one side and only where allowed to do so. Council will remember me mentioning that we're painting a parking delineation line along Lynn and Chesterman Road, which if your wheels cross over that line towards the center line, you'll be in a ticketable condition, and that will be executed within the next few weeks here. And we'll also provide some delineation to keep clear of driveway entrances to solve that problem, which we see a lot of right now, which is parked vehicles encroaching on driveways and making it safer or unsafe or inconvenient for people to access or enter their driveways. The 3 vehicles comment, I'm glad actually you brought it up, because I hadn't really mentioned that in my presentation. As we might imagine, a household who were wanting to register vehicles in the system to get access to an annual permit might have more than one vehicle for the owner that's listed on all of them. So if you're maybe a family, we had a couple of scenarios where we worked through where a family might have 3 vehicles. They might have children that are in their teens or something. They might have 3 vehicles, and those 3 vehicles are all registered under one person's name, and they get driven by everybody else. So the plan is that there's a permit for each license plate number. So we didn't want to necessarily restrict it to one permit per owner, because what if that owner owned the wife's vehicle was in their name, or the husband's vehicle was in their name, or they had a second car that they only drove in the summer, but they also didn't want to have to pay for a pass. They wanted that pass for free as well. So it was a consideration that happened early in our scenarios when we came to developing the registration process. So right now, if you were to do the registration process and you had 3 vehicles for your household that were all in your name, you could go register for the 3. If one was in your name and one was in your partner's name, then each of you would do 1 permit per vehicle. So there's no limit on the household, and what we're doing is we're associating a limit of vehicles per register or registrant. Hopefully that makes sense. The 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. thing is a real interesting one. Of course, we see today those instances where people go to the beach, and sunset being right now in the 10s, or at the beach potentially, well after sunset, which is close to that 11 p.m. Or like Mayor Law said, go late to take advantage of some natural, phenomena that's happening in the water that late at night in the darkness, or full moon surfs, for example. There's lots of people that access the beaches at those locations. And also what we see is a current frequent use of those spaces to sleep at night and to potentially has risks and consequences of litter and human waste and solid waste entering into the public realm in a ways that burdens the neighbors and the different people that would otherwise enjoy quiet at that time of the day. So I think what we want to do is we want to have a system which allows people to access those responsibly, but restricts or limits the amount of irresponsible kind of activities. And I think we see this in a lot of different areas. I think currently it might be safe to say, and I'll look at the CAO's face while I say this, it might be safe to say that the signs are there to dissuade people from abusing it or being irresponsible, but the enforcement is set in such a way that doesn't prevent the people from being responsible in those instances. Hopefully that's a fair comment, but I think we would have to carefully manage our overnight restrictions. There has been talks even since I've been here in a year, which is about should we gate the parking lots at all the different beach accesses to prevent overnight stays. Right now, currently what happens at 6 a.m. is Bylaw does their window knocking and gets people moving that were otherwise illegally camping in those areas. So I think we can find a practical way forward here. We don't want to put up signage that's lip service either, because that detracts away from the confidence people have in our rules. So I think I think I would take back this commentary, sit down with the CAO and talk a little bit about some of our professional advisors in this area to maybe find if there is a sweeter spot to land on when it comes to bringing back the bylaw proposed changes for council's review in 2 weeks. I guess that's, I keep cutting off and not saying anything more, but no one knows I'm finished. So I'll say I'm finished there. I'll mute myself.
Councillor Steer, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Fraser. Yeah, I just want to start out by thanking you for the report, of course, and understand the complexity of trying to institute a simple system, and through the community engagement process, I'm sure you found out how difficult that is to try to accommodate the very many requests in different viewpoints, and you have done a job in that area, and understanding that that does make it a little more complex than a simple system rollout when we try to accommodate all of the various stakeholders that have brought input into the system. I will try to address some of the more specific things that you asked for feedback on in the report, but I did want to start also by saying I do concur with Councillor Chalmers in the aspect of the difficulty in how we define local is problematic in general. And specifically in the context of the pay parking system, that moving forward will need some clarification, especially in the permanent or the annual permit registration process. How we clarify what a permanent or a resident of Tofino is, and it has been an issue in the past how we define that, and I think it's important that we have some clarification on that. In terms of the very specific things, such as the permanent overnight parking on the Chesterman Beach and the Frank Island, I do have to, as Councillor Thick brought forward, some concerns around, as you pointed out, the use of that public realm space, and in this case for a very tangible benefit to those very specific residents along that stretch of the proposed areas for paid parking. And that I would concur that on those pieces of private property where those services of parking are needed, that can be accommodated within those particular private properties. And within the context of Frank Island, it is a complex one, but it is in the ACRD. And I may be wrong, that you can correct, in terms of a pilot, or this may be temporary in terms of the needs for those residents, but it should also be indicated that this is not a long-term solution, that to be able to provide a very tangible benefit for somebody outside of the district. They do pay into the ACRD contributions, of which we are a part of in the ACRD. But I do have some issues with allocating a very specific resource for a very specific user that is outside of the District of Tofino. So if it is temporary in nature, I would be supportive, but there needs to be a long-term solution that probably does not include overnight parking in those very sought-after spaces. In terms of the question, there was one specific around Ucluelet specifically. Ucluelet is within the ACRD, so in that permitting process, I believe it was a costing of $60. And you can correct me if I'm wrong there. I think that you know, if we are to look at fees, that we can be inclusive of Ucluelet within that ACRD context, because they are part of it, and that would be an applicable a rate that we would offer towards our neighbors within the ACRD context. I believe, oh yeah, the last comment was in terms of future allocation of revenues. And I do believe the appropriate place for that is in the financial planning process that will be brought forward, where, you know, we have heard very clearly from your input and your community engagement around that certainly general revenue is not the place where I'm sure most of council would agree, and the public certainly has made their views forward. But having some suggestions coming from yourself, who's been directly involved, but it is the place for it will be in that financial planning process, where we can have a much more fulsome discussion and debate around the usages for there. I think, as you've indicated, we want to look at ways to provide the opportunities for people not to be utilizing vehicles to access this wonderful community amenity. So such things as our shuttle services and our multiple use path and all these sorts of amenities that we can potentially provide to lower those are some of the discussions that I think would be appropriate in that financial planning process moving forward. So those are all the comments. I don't think there's any answers to any of those other than to provide that feedback that you had requested, and to thank you once again for, which I know is a complex and difficult process, and I thank you for your time and effort on it.
Thank you, Councillor Steer. I just have a comment and a couple of questions. My comment is, when we talk about recreation, I think we all want what we don't have. And I think we tend to forget. I grew up in inner city Manchester. We had a top class sports centre. We paid to access that sports centre. We paid to park at the sports centre. I can guarantee you, if you'd gone around that sports centre and said, well, we're going to swap, you know, we've got a chance to swap this sports centre for a beach and an ocean where we can surf and kayak, I'm pretty confident what the vote would be. So, you know, we do have a lot of rec facilities. We just want more. So let's not forget that. My questions are, handicap parking, is that going to be free? And my second question was, what are these guest passes? I think, well, there's 5 per month. There was no clarification of that in the report.
Through the mayor and yourself acting, I think Mayor McMaster, I think that's the right title tonight. Sorry if that's awkward. The first question is, the intention is that the use of the accessible parking would be subjected to the same rate structure. They just are privileged by the spaces and the allocation of the spots, which are being introduced in more number and a little bit higher quality than they have been in the past through some of the physical improvements. Some temporary changes have already happened and will be enhanced with some better physical infrastructure in the coming weeks, again at some of those locations like North and South Chester. The intent around the overnight pass was this booklet. Councillor Steer just mentioned, of course, that a temporary solution or a pilot solution in the Frank Island situation might be a good idea. And we were also thinking about piloting this issue where you could, if you needed an overnight pass for a visiting family member and you haven't yet found the arrangements to allow them to park on your at your residence, which you might be renting from as a long-term renter on Lynn Road, which is the case of one of the individuals who came forward with this at our first town hall, would be that having some provision for their mother or their family member to park on the street for those very discrete or rare instances would be a big benefit or a big value, rather than having no options whatsoever. So the intention was to provide something, however inconvenient, at a reasonable pay point or cost, to go into Municipal Hall, prove that you're a resident of that house or resident, and buy a ticket that would hang on the rearview mirror in the vehicle and allow it to be parked there overnight, which would, our enforcement officers would then, bylaw and protective services could be notified that there's 4 vehicles tonight on Chesterman Beach Road, and these ones are authorized to be there, and no others are, that kind of thing. So it's it's a high level of service, and it was intended to give some of these residents a longer period of time to come up with some of those alternative arrangements, as Councillor Thick mentioned. By policy, design, and intent, I think all those properties should have available parking for their tenants, whether short-term or long-term, on the property, and we would always want to nudge it in that direction. I would just honor the fact that this is new and we are in a transition period, and that in itself suggests that there may be a support for a temporary service like this past DECO service.
Thank you for that. I tend to agree a little bit, but I still 5 passes per month still seems a lot to me. Maybe so many passes a year would be a better stipulation.
Through the mayor, the intent was, of course, if you had to prove your residency and it was that inconvenient, you'd probably start making some alternative arrangements, and also you would be less inclined to abuse them and potentially sell them off to someone who was going to be around, or that kind of thing. So we're trying to ideate a little bit around worst cases and best cases and frequent cases, but yeah, I think where the dial lands on a 3 day or 3 days per month or 5 days per month, or do a yearly thing, the intention is to avoid it being abused, and I think there's a couple of models that could work in that space.
Thanks for that. I'm sure we're going to learn a lot as we go along. So are there any more questions or comments? Oh, we'll go around again. Councillor Thick.
Yeah, there was just a lot of discussion about the 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. and others were not in favor, but I just wanted to offer my support for that. As someone who lives adjacent to a busy beach for over 30 years and has seen the abuse of the parking lot and the overnight frequency that is going on, I just think it sends a good message. And to Mayor Law's comment, if people are going there a little bit earlier, it just seems like when you allow that, or you're not clear about what is open and what isn't, the parking lot and the beach just become extensions of each other. So for me personally, and having lived next to a kind of a nightmarish situation, I think it sends a good message. And I just think I would just like to say I support that idea. Thank you.
Mayor Law.
Yeah, just a question, just to clarify a point that Councillor Steer was making. Are Ucluelet Tla-o-qui-aht residents included in eligible ACRD residents? And then I have another comment.
The current staff recommendation doesn't differentiate between the ACRD other than the Tofino and the First Nations that have been named as the communities north of the park. So they would in fact be part of the ACRD rate at $60 as per the staff recommendation right now.
And 2 more questions. One to do with the 11 a.m. or 11 p.m., 6 a.m. thing. That is not included if we're voting for recommendations. That is in flux, is it not?
That stipulation, I imagine, has to be clarified by the time we get to our bylaw readings. I would, if given the opportunity, I would go back and talk with the CAO and the fire chief about some of the considerations about our enforcement hours, what we do and don't enforce right now, and the risks and considerations around the different models. And then we would potentially leave the same conditions in the bylaw, or be able to change that with some commentary at the bylaw discussion, or we could entertain another direction as council wishes this evening.
And my final quick question is, when this comes around in 2022 for review, that is a review by council for all of this, these prices and elements as well, is that not?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Law, for mentioning that. I actually meant to suggest such flexibilities previously in my dialogue. Right now, I think staff is putting a set of recommendations and proposals in front of council that really focus on the 2021-2022 time horizon. And we would be back in front of council to talk about the future year rate structures, the future year considerations, changes, the lessons learned, and all of those things that would apply to the 2022-2023 season for parking, which would of course include rates for all user types and all different subscribers. So I think that might be an important distinction for us about what we need to decide on tonight and what could still be left to future discussions.
Thanks for that. That's all from me.
Any more questions? Okay, seeing none, I will move the recommendation that staff be directed to bring forth amendments to Traffic and Parking Regulation Bylaw number 1091, 2009, District of Tofino Fees and Charges Bylaw number 1271, 2019, and District of Tofino Bylaw Notice Enforcement and Dispute Adjudication System Bylaw number 1107, 2009, to support the implementation of beach pay parking as outlined in this report, and that staff be directed to provide council with recommendations and planning for pay parking initiatives, including sustainable mobility incentives and system improvements as part of the 2022 annual parking report. Are there any objections? Seeing none, motion is carried. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Fraser. Moving on, item 6.4, cemetery fees and charges review, verbal report from financial services.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. I'm just going to share my screen here. Oh, maybe I'm not. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Thank you. You should take one moment. It should turn on.
Okay, thank you. There we go. Okay, great. So we should be seeing an opening slide there to my report.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So I just have a short presentation for you this evening, and that's going to be to introduce the first steps in the cemetery fees and charges review. And staff aren't bringing forward the recommendation that was provided in the agenda package for you today. In May of 2018, Council passed a resolution that staff be directed to review all fine schedules and fees, terms and conditions to ensure they are current and fairly reflect the cost of services being provided. So based on this resolution, staff have the direction needed to move forward with reviewing the District of Tofino Cemetery Bylaw number 1086, 2009. And this is being introduced to Council as the schedule of fees and charges in this particular bylaw have not been reviewed since its adoption in 2009. So the District of Tofino owns and operates the Seaview Cemetery along with the historic cemetery site on Morpheus Island. And the Seaview Cemetery, for those who aren't familiar, is located just about 2 kilometers past the Tourist Information Center along Pacific Rim Highway. And it offers traditional in-ground burial for both caskets and cremated remains. And it's available for use for veterans, residents, and non-residents as a final resting place for their loved ones. So just for some context, the following table here outlines the revenues and expenses over the past 5 years, as well as the budgeted amounts for 2021. And as you can see, it's quite variable from year to year. The sale of plots and plaques varies, and we do receive an annual donation from the Commonwealth War Graves. In terms of expenses, these include items like cemetery license fees, costs associated with purchasing and shipping of memorial plaques, and maintenance expenses, which could include anything from new benches, sheds, clearing of storm debris from the road in the winter months. And you'll notice as well in 2021, $14,000 has been budgeted for necessary cemetery improvements to add new soil and sand on site, reseeding and leveling in some areas. And this is a result of minimal maintenance being undertaken at the cemetery for the past several years. So staff are conducting this review to ensure that ongoing costs to maintain the cemetery are being covered without the need for additional funding from taxation, such as we saw in 2021 for those larger maintenance costs, as well to ensure that operating costs are being considered in the fees and charges. So in addition to general maintenance of the site, staff are responsible for the operations of the cemetery, which includes preparing grave sites and then additional materials and supplies as needed. So in order to determine if the current fees and charges outlined in the bylaw continue to be reasonable and are fairly reflecting the cost of services, the proposed scope of the review will include a review of the current and historical operating costs of the Tofino Seaview Cemetery, and then compare the existing fees and charges with 6 different municipality-run cemeteries on Vancouver Island, such as District of Tofino, Port Alberni, the Village of Cumberland, City of Courtenay, Town of Qualicum Beach, as well as the municipality of North Cowichan. And the current bylaw includes the following items listed here, which will also be reviewed in addition to the specific schedule of fees and charges. And some of these items may remain the same if they are working, and other changes may be brought forward to council's consideration. So the bylaw includes interment rights and the use of grave spaces, transfer and surrender of the reclamation of interment rights, the fees and charges and penalties, as we've discussed, administration of the cemetery care fund, permit instructions and regulations around interment plaques and other general considerations. So in terms of next steps, staff will be performing a review of the current bylaw as described. And if there are changes that are recommended, the information and the findings will be brought forward to council, and staff will seek authorization to prepare an amendment bylaw at that time later in the year. And I'll leave it open to questions and comments, and I'll just stop sharing my screen here.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Any questions for Laura? Councillor Steer.
Thank you, Laura. Appreciate that. I do want to say right up front that I am a frequent visitor of both Seaview, which is limited in its view of the sea nowadays, and Morpheus, and we know Morpheus was the god of rest, and so it has been ordained by the gods. So I do want to talk a little bit about sort of the philosophy that I feel those are incredibly important community amenities, once again, that we've been talking about earlier. And it is in my view, an extension of our park space, and that it is one area where, you know, I did note in your report that where we want to proceed without need for general taxation for the servicing and maintaining of that site. And I just want, as an opinion for something when you are in that review process, that I feel it is an important community amenity that is, and I know it sits outside of some of the other amenities that we offer, but that a consideration is that it is an area of, that I personally do not mind being taxed for to provide what I think is a very valuable community amenity in general, but in a larger context as well. That's all I'm going to say on that. But just to note that some of the things that we do pay for through taxation have great benefits that that we do know and may not have to be cost neutral. So thank you, and I do appreciate that it has been a long time since it has been reviewed, and that that it was ordained by council in 2018 to proceed in that way.
Thank you, Councillor Steer, through the chair. I've made note of that comment. Thank you.
Mayor Law.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. I just do have a point actually following along Councillor Steer's comment about taxation or funds to go to it, especially maintenance and improvements. And about a year ago, I did ask for, I did float it to staff to note that elderly people with mobility challenges cannot access the graves easily. And as a taxpayer, I'd be happy to have my taxes, the tiny amount of my taxes, go to increasing access to those sites for people with mobility issues. I think that's actually quite important. Thank you for that, by the way. Good job.
Councillor Fitt.
Yeah, thanks again. And I just had a question. Has there been any problems there? I mean, I know there's still a sign, no camping anytime, but I understand why it's being brought up. But has there been any other problems that we haven't heard about in regards to the cemetery or Morpheus? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Thick. I would have to say that I'm not aware of any major issues. I know the main consideration that's come up over the last year or two is really in regards to the maintenance of the site and the need for some larger maintenance projects to occur there. But I wouldn't be able to speak to any other issues in terms of camping or bylaw infractions at this time.
Great, thank you.
Any more comments? Seeing none, I'll move the recommendation that staff be directed to proceed with a review of the District of Tofino cemetery fees and charges for council's consideration. Are there any objections? Seeing none, motion is carried. Anyone signed up for questions? I doubt it. Jackie?
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, no, we do have not any signups for a question period.
Perfect. Have a motion to adjourn, please. Unanimous. Okay, enjoy the rest of the week, guys.